the root of our lives, we have no existence. And because we don't know Allah, know God, and know ourselves, we don't know one another. Look, when I see you, I know who I'm looking at. There's not one of you in this place that I don't love. I may never have met you before, but when I see you, I know who I'm looking at. And I know that I have a duty by you. And you will never find me disrespecting any of you because I know who you are. It makes no difference how young or how old. You are from Allah. Listen now. And therefore, the essence of you is Him. I'm going to say that again. You are from Allah. Therefore, the essence of you is Him. So you are not only able to become a human being, but if you evolve properly, you can become an expression of, a manifestation of the divine characteristics of God Himself. Listen. So the Bible says, how can you love God whom you have never seen and hate your brother whom you see every day? Let's not just say it, let's understand it more. Listen, how can you love God whom you've never seen and hate your brother whom you see every day? Now the principal words in this is God and brother. And you have love and hate. Two opposites. But God and brother are not opposite. God and brother are similar, but you love one that you've never seen and hate the other whom you see every day. Well, now what Allah is saying to us is when you hate your brother, in whom is the essence of God, you are hating God. So the question is asked, how can you love God whom you've never seen and hate your brother in whom God is? And you see him every day. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, every time I see a black man, I'm looking at God. You are now tuned in to the Respect for Life radio broadcast with your host, Brother Keith Muhammad. This program is dedicated to the unity and upliftment of the Black community. Our goal is to change the world, one mind at a time. For Life radio broadcast. I'm your host, Brother Keith Muhammad, coming to you live via cmpradio.net. With the Respect for Life radio program design, or really our focus is to help change the world one mind at a time. Our mantra here at the Respect for Life broadcast is whoever controls the diameter of your thinking and prescribes the diameter of your thinking, controls the circumference of your activities. And we are in a world today where activities on the planet, activities certainly in the Black community, have reached 100% dissatisfaction, where we are dissatisfied with what's going on. But in order to really change it, we have to change how we're thinking. So we welcome everyone that's tuned in on this Tuesday evening. We ask that you share our broadcast. We're grateful once again, as we always say, for the opportunity to come via this platform. My good brother John Pierre, founder and CEO of this radio station, Cultivating Mature Positivity. We appreciate him and his work in the community, in the city of Chester, and the work he's doing to try to make a change in the reality of the lives of the people, first and foremost in Chester, and then throughout America and the world via this platform on the internet. So the Respect for Life broadcast is on. As we just said, share it. We have a few topics tonight we want to discuss, a couple news stories, and then we want to deal with what we just mentioned about the dissatisfaction with the circumstances, with the conditions in our community, or whether it's in your life or anywhere else. And what are some of the factors that play into it? Because if you want to solve a problem, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us you got to get to the root of the problem. And if you can't get to the root, then we'll put band-aids on top of band-aids, and we'll try to change the conditions under which we live. But if we never get to the root of it, it's like knocking down a spider's web. If you don't get the spider, it'll be back up there. So it's important for us to get to the root of our problems. And that's where we get to analyzing, examining and analyzing our thought process, that we may be able to change our reality. Because as the scripture says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And everything we think or everything we do is preceded by a thought. So we have to learn to discipline our thinking in order to change our condition and our actions. So brothers and sisters, we want to begin, as we often do, with Walaikum Salam. I see my wife, Sister Tracy, Brother Eric. Glad you're tuned in. Again, and those that are watching, I can't see all the comments, so if you comment and I don't respond, they told me last week some people were commenting, but I couldn't really see it. I don't know why. I don't see all of them, but I do see some. But we'll work. That's probably because I'm not in the studio. If I was there, I probably could see everything. But God willing, we'll be back there soon. But we want to begin with a story, of course, that's in the news right now. It hasn't exploded, but it is exploding right now on the West Coast in particular. Another shooting of another black man. They're saying he was armed, but a brother by the name of Dijon Kizzy, I think he's 29 years old, in what they're calling a encounter. It says Kizzy was shot by police after they tried to stop him for riding his bike on 110th Street in Budlong Avenue after cops said he violated a vehicle code. So basically, the brother was riding his bike, and like you do when you drive a car, there are rules and regulations. So whatever the circumstance was, they tried to pull him over for a bike violation, a vehicle violation, and the vehicle happened to be his bicycle. And they say as they approached the suspect, he abandoned his bike and began running towards 109th place. And if you've seen the video, there is a video, but there's not a video of the actual shooting. You have the before and the aftermath. So here's another young brother shot down. And from what they're saying, it was over 20 shots. And when you see the video, you can see he's not on his bike. He's on foot. He's running away from the police. He has clothes in his hands. And then the video picks back up right after they shot him. According to the police, they said they attempted to approach him again after the initial encounter, which he ran away from. And according to Lieutenant Brandon Dean, he claims Kizzy punched one of the officers in the face, and at the same time dropping some clothes he was using to allegedly conceal a handgun. So they're saying it was a gun. They're saying he dropped the clothes and the gun. They're saying he punched him. But yet and still, When you see where the officers are stationed, and I guess the autopsy report will determine where they shot him. But when I see the video, they pick up, once the video cuts and then picks back up, the cops are standing probably 10 to 15 feet away, still with their guns drawn. He's down almost in between two parked cars on the ground after having been shot. Then they come and handcuffed him, and there's a whole lot of aftermath. And last night there were protests. But here we go again. It seems like every week, at least last week we came on, there was of course, the shooting of our brother in Wisconsin, and the aftermath with the young white supremacist uh, Trump supporter who came into the protest and shot 3 people, killed 2 allegedly. And what's going on in this circumstance and everyone since we've been here? It's not a new situation. It's not something unusual. Walaikum salam, Brother Brahim. Um, but it's the norm in our community. Also tonight, as I was driving here to start the program, we got a text. There is a vigil for the young brother. I don't know his name. I didn't get his name in the report, but a young man was gunned down this past weekend in Chester, 16 years old, on 3rd Street, I believe, 2900 block of 3rd or 2nd, the report said, but someone said the report says 2nd Street, but I think it may be 3rd Street. But either way, another young life in our community taken. And as we see in all across America, not only in Chester, Philadelphia, Chicago, in the Black communities, there seems to be a great spike in the gun violence and the murder rate of our young people in the streets of America. And between the police, between the pandemic, as we're going to read a statistic and a story that I was reading a little earlier in the current edition of the Final Call newspaper, um, that this year, COVID-19 is going to apparently surpass several other causes of death in the Black community and be number 3 amongst Black people in America in the cause of death. But between the pandemic, between the gun violence in our community and the police gunning us down at a rate nearly 3 times our white counterparts in America, it's a wonder that the Black man is not officially listed on the endangered species list here in America. So, brothers and sisters, I just wanted to bring that story. I'm sure more detail will come out, more reports. But because they're saying it's probably no body cameras because it was not the LAPD, but the sheriff's department, they're saying that they didn't have body cameras. But maybe there's another video out there other than the one that's been posted, or a full complete one, because that one it starts and it cuts off. So we'll see. Keep our eyes and ears open on that. There's a rally, or pardon me, a vigil, as we just said, starting at 6:30 in the city of Chester for the young man that was gunned down this past weekend. The loss of life, the lack of respect for life. You know, there's a whole campaign, and of course, the official organization Black Lives Matter is one thing, but the mantra of Black Lives Matter in a literal sense is something that is being echoed across America, across the world. And there's a constant fight on the part of our people to convince others. And we need to also convince ourselves that Black Lives Matter. And one of the things that we aim, and really the motivation of this program, as my brother approached me, man, it's going on. I guess we've been on probably over a year now, or somewhere, yeah, over a year for the Respect for Life broadcast. As we talked about it, he wanted me to be a part of the station. And as I thought about the program and what we may cover, the one thing that came to mind was a series of lectures that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan did in the 1980s called Respect for Life. And as we have said over many times on the broadcast, the literal meaning of the word respect, when you break it down to its prefix and the root word, it means to look again. And when we look at the violence, the senseless murder, the loss of life, along with the wanton disrespect of our life, the abuse of our life in many different fashions and forms, we need to look at our life again and gain a newfound respect for it and appreciation for it. But you can't love and respect something that you have no knowledge and understanding of. So the Nation of Islam, under the guidance of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, we begin first and foremost with the knowledge of self and the knowledge of the creator of self, and also a knowledge of the enemy of self, so that we can see things properly, put them in their proper perspective, and hopefully by the grace of God, have a transformation take place in our thought as it pertains to our individual life. And if I start to see myself differently, then I'm going to see others who look like myself differently. And I'll understand better and have a better appreciation for the value of life. But if I don't love me, don't have value in my life, God help you when you encounter me. Because if I don't respect or appreciate and value me, you know you have no chance of having respect and appreciation given to you by someone that hates themselves. So, brothers and sisters, that's a story brewing right now. But the actual news report I wanted to cover is from the Final Call newspaper. The new edition just came out every Tuesday. You can get your digital copy, a copy of the Final Call newspaper, or your printed copy of the Final Call, as the brothers, or the printed paper uh, has begun being reprinted or being printed again, pardon me, throughout the cities. But the printed edition of the Final Call, because of COVID-19, because of the restrictions, because of social distancing and various components, is only going to be printed every other week for the next month or so. But every week you can get your copy via Final Call digital edition that you can subscribe to. Go to finalcall.com and seek out that subscription. But in the current edition of the Final Call, as we talked about COVID-19 and the report saying that it could be the number 3 cause of death in the United States for Black people. And we are disproportionately affected, as we always are, by COVID-19 and so many other things that are negative in this community, from incarceration rate, all the diseases, all the social ills, poverty, all the miseducational statistics. We seem to take the lead in all of that, disproportionately to our population here in America. And it's not an accident. But anyway, in the current edition of the Final Call, our brother right here from Philadelphia, Brother Jaron Muhammad, who's a great reporter for the Final Call newspaper, as he's written for various publications throughout the years. Our great brother wrote an article dealing with the subject is titled Deadly Politics, Cuba's COVID-19 Treatment and U.S. Refusal to Save Lives. So this story is centered around a treatment that Cuba has been using in Cuba as well as throughout the world, as the Cuban medical forces have been marshaled to various countries, including China, during this pandemic, and has been really, to use the term that many of us use who are believers, a godsend to many nations and many individuals. But I want to read from this report because there are treatments, as we just heard right before I left work. I heard a report on the news about this plasma treatment that they're now saying is not effective. And earlier last week, they were touting it as a new means of treatment. And we know in this political season, Mr. Trump is doing everything he can to get reelected. And Mr. Biden, of course, is doing the same, trying to get into the seat of office called the President of the United States. But when you look at the COVID-19 pandemic that is ravaging America, over 84,000 dead now, 6 million infected, millions around the world affected. There's a pestilence, as the minister called it, a pestilence from heaven that's affecting the world. But in the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's monumental July 4th address, he brings up treatments, and he specifies one treatment that is being used out of Cuba. And this Cuban therapy that they're using seems to have a measure of effectiveness. But let's look at the article here. During a phone interview, so Brother Jerron is interviewing a doctor, Dr. Melissa Barber, the program coordinators for Cuba's Latin American School of Medicine. And we mentioned that last week. Two of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's granddaughters, a young sister that was once here in Philadelphia in the mosque, Sister Naira Muhammad, all went to the program with many others that Fidel Castro, may God be pleased with him, he established, along with the medical school there, a program for free medical school training for students who want to become doctors, who want to come back and serve the underserved communities. And last week, we talked about Black doctors mattering, right? And how the birth rate and death rate of children, Black children, is cut in half. The death rate is cut in half when they have a Black doctor caring for the mother and the child. So anyway, Dr. Barber is the program coordinator for Cuba's Latin School of Medicine program. And it's also called the IFCO Passage for Peace. Said of the island's nations, 11 million people in Cuba, only 88 COVID-19 deaths, 3,482 confirmed cases since March. Compare that with the United States, with a population of 328 million. Since March has registered 5.5. Now it's over 6 million confirmed cases with over 100. And this has 73,000, but this has been updated to 183 and counting, 184,000 deaths. So here in Cuba, the San Francisco, it says that this obvious widespread disparity between the percentages of COVID-19 deaths in Cuba and the United States, at least when it comes to medical care during the pandemic, the small, under U.S. sanctioned country must know something. So Cuba had a very effective, they lost 88 people, and one is a lot, but 11 million people on the island, 3,482 cases, 88 deaths in Cuba. But Dr. Barber, a medical doctor and healthcare advocate, is stating, well, let me go back. I'm sorry. We should all know that Cuba is under embargo. The relationship with Cuba, we don't have time to go over the whole history, but Cuba, of course, is under basically embargoes from the United States. It's been there for decades. As we mentioned last week, hundreds of attempts on the life of Fidel Castro, trying to assassinate the leader of another country. America was unsuccessful, but in the name of, so-called human rights violations and other things, but really because they aligned themselves with Russia at one time, the communist nation of Cuba, and many other things, that America has had Cuba 90 miles off the coast of Florida under embargo for many decades now. And under the Obama administration, they relieved some of those restrictions. And I actually seen our good brother Devin, and he probably can tell you about his experience and some of his team. They went over to Cuba recently. I seen the pictures and videos. But Cuba, right off the coast of Florida, they have a world-renowned medical and research team, but basically they're renowned around the world for their medical capabilities, in particular dealing with the viruses that have been ravaging the world for many decades now. But let me go back to the story. So Cuba's rate of death, only 88. She's talking about the aggression. We know the aggression and the history that the U.S. has taken against Cuba from the longest time. So this is the kind of history always repeats itself. Our government is always taking a stand against people of color. This is her talking about the American government taking a stand against the people of color in Cuba. And when you understand the Cuban dynamics, the minister on his July 4th July 4th message talked about the virus ravaging Florida and him asking God and really calling for these sanctions, these embargoes to be lifted against Cuba, because you have a Cuban population in Florida that is the white Cubans. And if you know the history of Cuba, it used to be a playground for America. When Castro came in, he kicked them out, got rid of their playground. And before Las Vegas and these other places, Cuba was the playground with the casinos, the mob, and the Cubans that left and fled under the uprising in Cuba were the pale Cubans. And now, not that there aren't any left, but those who are vehemently opposed to Castro and his regime tend to be those who are the white Cubans who had their playground upset by Castro. But anyway, so America, under the pressure of these Cubans, and many who happen to be Jewish, certainly powerful ones, influencing our government affairs, helped to establish this dynamic between Cuba and America. Obama relieved some of the restrictions. Trump reinstated many of them. But anyway, what is the source of Cuba's low COVID-19 infection rate, and why have countries including China, Italy, Germany, and countries in Africa requested Cuba's assistance? It has to do with the fact that Cuba's very early entry into the biotech industry, according to University of Glasgow lecturer specializing in Latin American Cuban, Helen Yaffe, this entry into the biotech industry allowed the island's nation to harness international expertise and develop medicines to fight dengue fever, meningitis. One of these, Yaffe writes, is interferon alpha 2B, which is now being used to combat the effects of COVID-19. So interferon alpha 2B, has proven effective for viruses with characteristics similar to those of COVID-19. Cuba biotech specialist Dr. Luis Herrera Martinez explains that its use prevents aggravation and complications in patients reaching the stage that can ultimately result in death. So alpha interferon, and this is a medicine that one of our doctors, Dr. Abdul Alim Muhammad, going back to the early 90s, began treating AIDS patients with this interferon because it's good for viruses in general. And there are cases and studies, and it was one brother in particular that was at the Million Man March that was cured of his HIV utilizing this alpha interferon treatment. But here, interferon alpha 2B has proven to be effective against the COVID-19 virus. But most of us have never heard of it. America's doctors, specialists, everybody that's talking about what can we do? We need some therapies. We need this. It's not a magic wand, but it's proven to be an effective treatment. And you wonder why many places around the world have gotten a grip on the virus to a degree where America is still struggling with tens of thousands of new infections every day, 1,000 new deaths every day, just about for the last several months, and an administration in particular, but a general population that really doesn't understand why. America, supposedly the greatest nation on the earth, American exceptionalism, all this stuff, is really lagging far behind in the way of trying to keep its citizens safe from a pandemic, as well as keep its citizens safe from all the other epidemics, as we mentioned, the violence epidemic, the unhealthy condition of the citizens of America, the fallen educational system, the fallen economy. America is really falling before our eyes. We just don't understand it because they keep telling you America is number one. So anyway, Cuba has a treatment that for political reasons, you can't even hear about it, let alone get it in America. Since the early 80s, Cuba has invested over 1 billion US dollars in developing biotechnology programs. From these early developments, the socialist country developed a highly successful healthcare system with its focus on global healthcare outreach and state-of-the-art drug development facilities, reported data science and drug development writer Ellie Harris. Today, Cuba's biotechnology industry exports to over 50 countries. So they're working with over 50 nations on the earth. They have a highly advanced, thorough biotech industry. And even though the use of interferon 2B to mitigate the effects of COVID-19 is known around the globe, the Trump administration has refused to allow sales in the US or even testing of interferon and other Cuban-made drugs. In fact, rather than promote scientific exchange, reports 48hill.com, the Trump administration has stepped up attacks on Cuba's medical system, particularly the 28,000 Cuban medical workers in countries around the world. So they have 28,000 medical professionals around the world working in 50 countries. Their biotech industry is helping the health of millions of people around the world. And 90 miles off the shores of Florida is this tiny nation that has advanced medical treatments. And this goes to show you they're not interested. As I was listening to my brother, Father Flager, on Nick Cannon's Cannon class, he was on there, I don't know, a week or two ago. I took the time today to listen to it. And Father Flager is a white Catholic priest. He's renowned for his work on the south side of Chicago. But Nick asked him about the violence. And what he said is America could stop the violence if it wanted to. It don't have the will to. She doesn't want to stop it. The minister once referenced, you can stop a Cuban cigar from getting in the country, but you can't stop guns. You can't stop the violence in the inner cities of America. You don't have the will because there's not really the care. And in fact, they're working to manufacture it in many ways. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But anyway, this treatment out of Cuba has gone all around the world, but it hasn't made 90 miles into America. But there are works going on in various places within America, not only trying to get hey, what's up, Ahmad? It's not monetarily advantageous, right? Exactly. So they'll fight against it. First of all, they ain't got a patent for it, so they can't make the money. And it's a low cost treatment if you really look at it. But anyway, this alpha interferon is helping people to keep the death rate down around the world. And in Cuba, only 88 dead. But this goes to show us that they're not really interested. I've watched all the pundits. We all of us probably tired of watching the news now because it's just a production. If you watch the major news networks, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, it's a repetitive mantra of the same thing over and over and over again. But when it comes to treatments, nobody, have you heard interferon mentioned? And I seen a report right before I left work is also our research team posted it on Twitter. How, Ralph, Facebook got this fact check thing where they'll take your post down because it's fact checked and it's not right. And many things that deal with the COVID-19 or other things, they're showing that many of these major fact checkers are the ones they're paying. Bill Gates have them in his pocket. And I didn't get to listen to the whole story, but they're financing. We know Gates and his Gates Foundation is renowned for vaccine promotion around the globe. And these vaccines have maimed and killed countless numbers of people all around the planet. And we've seen in various reports him being, of course, a eugenics interested in population control. And one of the means of doing this is a vaccine. So you heard the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan on July 4th said, we're not taking that vaccine, but as I'm about to read, Cuba is working on a vaccine. So anyway, this interferon has proven to be effective in many ways. So it says here, it says Supervisor Hillary Ronen, who sponsored the San Francisco resolution, has said that Cuba's sophisticated pharmaceutical industry has developed important drugs that should be available in the U.S. Cuba is among the top countries that found effective treatments for Ebola, swine flu, she said. Limiting cooperation with Cuba makes no sense. I skipped over that part in the earlier part of the story. It talks about on July 24th. So you have some people in America, a San Francisco Board of Supervisors, on July 21st, the city of the Bay, on the Bay, pardon me, unanimously passed a resolution calling for the U.S. to cooperate with Cuba to fight COVID-19. So you have San Francisco Board of Supervisors passing a resolution asking the government to cooperate with Cuba and work to treat COVID-19 at the time when the federal government and many states were failing to curb the pandemic. The resolution noted that the U.S. can save lives by entering into medical and scientific collaboration with Cuba. That's if you cared about people. That's if you cared about saving human life. You wouldn't be worried about an embargo, worried about politics. But because life of the masses of the people matters little to those in power and ruling the world, or doesn't matter at all to many, they're not going to deal with Cuba in this treatment. But as we mentioned earlier, there are groups within America that work to get the alpha interferon into America, and there is a way. And from what some of our medical people have said, you can buy a vial and you can keep it in the freezer forever. But anyway, there's something, not forever, of course, but it lasts a very long time. You wouldn't have to worry about it going bad or anything like that. But anyway, last port in the story, it says, according to Cuba's media service, the country, let me go back, as the world is in a race to develop a coronavirus vaccine, Cuba announced it is kicking off clinical trials. According to Cuba's media service, the country is kicking off clinical trials of a potential coronavirus vaccine called Soberana, excuse my Spanish, it means sovereign. Sovereign 01, developed by a state-run Finley Institute with results due in February. The potential coronavirus vaccine will be delivered in 2 injections during the trials, which will involve 676 people aged between the ages of 19 and 80 and conclude on January 11th. The island nation prides itself in its biopharmaceutical industry, begun by former leader Commandant Fidel Castro, which could be a hard currency earner and already produces several vaccines. So I just wanted to bring that out. You can go to the final call, get the whole story. You know, the discussion of a Cuban medical cooperation resolution is something that needs to happen in America. See, this is something that, you know, as much as people like to point the fingers at Trump, and certainly Trump is Trump. We know him. He doesn't hide who he is and what he is. But what about the others who are in positions of power and authority, who have the ability to pass laws, resolutions, bills? Where's the uproar over treatments that are being used around the world that could help people in America that are dying. Where's the care? Where's the concern? Um, you don't hear it coming from the medical professionals that they put on television. I'm not talking about all the doctors, but the corporate sponsored news, corporate controlled news, the corporate controlled government that we live under in America. You got to know that the pharmaceutical companies and the multinational corporations and the banks control the politics of this world, control the politics of America. And that's why many people are fed up with the whole political process. Because, yes, you may get a different appearance from Biden and you may get a few different results, but the end result for the masses of the people will remain the same and consistent unless we do something collectively to make a difference. So, with that, brothers and sisters, all those who are tuned in, thank you, thank you, thank you again. Share the broadcast. Now we want to get into the last portion of our program: how environment shapes behavior. How environment shapes behavior. It's no accident, as we've said over and over again, that everywhere you find our people living in a densely populated or mass populated area, inner cities mainly, of America, where Black people, the majority of us reside, the conditions are the same. I've said it over and over again. If it was just Philadelphia, if it was just Chester, you could say, man, something wrong with those people there. But the reality is, everywhere you go, you find the same conditions pervasive amongst us in our communities. And I'm going to read something here from a book that I began reading, haven't gotten far into it because I keep putting it down and not picking it back up. But I want to talk about how environment shapes behavior and how specifically the engineering of our environments that we live in is not something that happened in a organic way. The environment that we live in just didn't occur. And those that are older, those that have been around a little longer, they'll tell you how Chester used to be. You talk about how North Philly used to be. You talk about this part of Chicago, that part of Detroit, how it was. Yes, there was poverty. Yes, there was certain conditions that were disadvantaged toward our people. That's how it's been since we've been here. But we didn't suffer from the things we suffer from now. So I want to look at this in this book that our good brother, Dr. Wesley Muhammad, it's a big, thick book, 800 pages or so. But it's part 2 of understanding the assault on the Black man. If you don't realize there's an assault on the Black male, you've been living under a rock. And I know we all understand that now. We should understand that. But what we can fathom, or can't fathom, pardon me, like the Bible says, we can't fathom the depths of Satan. So many of us, even though we know things are bad, we think it's something that can be changed with laws. Police training, retraining, sensitivity training, all these things, defund the police. Well, what about the white supremacists like, I think his name is Rittenhouse, that walked through the streets and at the protest with an AR-15? What about these militias and others? He killed 2 white people in this case, but from what the reports are saying, he was very not aggressive in action, but in words, and really looking like he's trying to start something with many Black individuals there in Wisconsin. But anyway, we should know that there's an assault on the Black male, and Brother Wesley wrote a book, Assault on the Black Male, Black Manhood, and Black Masculinity. I don't know if that's the direct order, but this is part 2 of that great work where he documents. I like what my brother says, because they'll tell you now, and people will say, y'all conspiracy theorists. And Brother Wesley said, no, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy documentarian, because there are conspiracies at work all the time. To conspire is to breathe or come together and work toward a common aim or purpose, two or more people. So there are conspiracies going on all around. But there's a great conspiracy, and one of the great conspiracies is the destruction of the black man. But let's look at this. I don't have time to get into a lot of things, but here in this book, he's dealing with the prison industrial complex. And this section, chapter 6, is entitled Prison Experiments and the Homosexuality Project. Now, I'm not going to get into that aspect of it, but I want to read something in here that deals with how they know and have studied and are really experts in how to environmentally affect and change and form and shape people into what they want them to be. But he starts this section off and he talks about white male fragility and the rise of black male mass incarceration. The response from this bruised and fragile white masculinity was the carceral explosion and the phenomenon of mass incarceration of young black males, a phenomenon that began under President Richard Nixon. So he's talking about the decades of the 60s, and he's talking about, and we've talked about it before, all the uprising, all the riots, all the violence as they talking about it now. We can't protest and no, peaceful marching can be effective in one way. But when people really don't care and don't have the humanity and the empathy and care for human life, not black life, that's why the mantra is Black Lives Matter. Then appealing to their moral sense just ain't working. We've been doing that for over 400 years. And this is why knowing your enemy is so important, along with knowing yourself, because we make fatal mistakes in dealing with our enemy, thinking we're going to change him with our appeal to his morality. Well, anyway, talking about the fragile masculinity of white males and how intimidated they are by black males in particular. And we know this, but their specific dealing with the trouble and the problem that they saw, because they thought they had a docile slave after all they did for 400 years. But the uprising showed that no matter what they did, this natural response to oppression and murder and violence coming from our oppressor is there going to be an explosion of violence and revolt against that system at some point in time. It's just in nature. So anyway, this led to hyper incarceration, as he says here. But this is what I want to read. In April of 1961, a very important symposium took place in Washington, D.C., entitled The Power to Change Behavior Symposium, presented by the U.S. Bureau of Prisons. This symposium, organized by the National Institute of Mental Health, brought together prison wardens and their staff, behavioral scientists, and social scientists. The aim of the symposium was to discuss and develop behavior modification techniques that could be tested on thousands of captive U.S. prisoners and applied in society at large. See? So here they had a symposium of really how to modify behavior, because they want to control your behavior. That's why the mantra here at the Respect for Life program is whoever prescribes the diameter of thinking, whoever controls your thinking controls your actions. So how we think, whoever prescribes that determines how we act. So anyway, this symposium was chaired by Dr. James Bennett, director of the U.S. Bureau of Prisons, co-chaired by Bertram Brown. And at that time, Bertram Brown was the staff psychiatrist at the National Institute of Mental Health and special assistant to President John F. Kennedy. All right. I know a lot of us love John F. Kennedy. The keynote speaker was Dr. Edgar Shin. Dr. Edgar Shin, an associate professor of psychology at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and the chief of social psychology section at Walter Reed Army Institute. So here he studied, where he studied, and it was held with CIA funding, the brainwashing techniques used by the Chinese during the Korean War. So this Dr. Shin was the keynote speaker at this conference, and he was a CIA trained doctor who had studied the techniques of used by the Chinese in the Korean War. So anyway, look at this. Dr. Shin, he learned the brainwashing is the ability to deliberately change the behavior and the attitudes of a captive population. Attitudes of a captive population by a group of men who have relative complete control of the environment in which that population is confined, be it prison, a concentration camp, or a ghetto. In other words, to successfully control a group's behavior and modify it to meet your desires, you don't have to have control of a person's body. You need only have control of his environment, and by manipulating that environment, you can manipulate his behavior and coercively persuade him to adopt a culture that he otherwise would have resisted. Dr. Shin called this technique coercive persuasion. At the symposium, Dr. Shin outlined 24 methods of psychological, physical, and chemical control to be tested on inmate populations and later used to make society safe, as he calls it. So this is where understanding the depth of Satan comes into play. Many people could not believe that people sit up and plot the culling, as the minister called it, of billions of people from the planet, to get rid of billions of people on the planet. But there are people who are thinking and acting on that very thing. And here, based on the civil rights movement, based on Black people asking to be treated fairly, asking for justice, making a demand to say my life matters, produced a response by our enemy. And that response was, how can we control these Negroes better? And the reality is, they went to work to produce environmental controls that will produce outcomes that would make them safe. So when you see white people walking through North Philly, they safe. When you see white people in Chester, they safe. When's the last time? It happens occasionally. But where's the murder and the killing of other people other than our own self in the inner cities of America? It's very rare. But we kill one another day in and day out. So anyway, this behavior modification or coercive persuasion, as he called it, Dr. Shin, after his talk, the training director encouraged the wardens to apply Shin's techniques in their prison. So he had 24 methods of physically, psychologically, and chemically controlling the behavior of a population if you could control that environment. All right. So it says at this 1961 symposium, there were two main focuses: behavior modification techniques to be tested on inmates and applied to society. And the second focus was a persistent problem that the prison personnel around the country were confronted with. I want y'all to listen. And which they needed urgent resolution in order for them to be successful in their endeavor. So they wanted to focus on this behavior modification technique, and they want to use the prisons because you got a captured audience. You got a whole population of guinea pigs to be used as they want. And I'm going to mention a story in here. He talks about one of the most renowned and worst places to engage in this was Holmesburg Prison. I'll touch on that in a minute. But anyway, brothers and sisters, um, they had this symposium. They were focusing two main focuses: behavior modification techniques that they can implement in the prison, and then take them once they know they work, apply it to the broader society. But the other focus of the symposium is we trying to do this in the prison, but we got a major problem in the prison. And what the problem was, what was this persistent problem? The persistent subject during the symposium was the problem of the Black Muslims within the nation's prisons during this period, reported Brett Story. The Bureau of Prisons, like the rest of the white power structure, was confronted with a Black Muslim problem. At the symposium, the question was urgently raised, how shall we manage the Muslims? Milford reported. And then it goes on to talk about what they decided they wanted to do. But one way, on ways of dealing with the unruly, a panelist offered, talking about the Muslims. See, it says, how can you counteract, how can you counteract the effects of the kinds of techniques they use to recruit members and cause general mischief in the prison? Mischief to them was having disciplined men, disciplined men in the system that will give them trouble in implementing their problems. All right. And excuse me one second. Anyway, going on. So they had a problem in the prison. They wanted to implement this program, but they had the Black Muslims in there. So they say one way of dealing with this unruly, or these unrulies, a panelist offered, is to some extent where we formerly had isolation as a controlling techniques, we now have drugs. So the drugs, in a sense, became a new kind of restraint. The restraint, therefore, is biochemical, but this is restraint nevertheless. So they wanted to drug the brothers. They wanted to chemically affect them. They wanted to isolate them. They were isolating and keeping them away from the other population, but also wanted to use drugs. Look at this. So they had a program that they wanted to implement where they would have a good population they can use. They wanted to be able to effectively try out, test, and implement their behavior modification program so that they can bring it out to the national or the society so they can do what? Control the behavior, make themselves safe. So anyway, they had a brainwashing and behavior modification techniques, and they piloted this at many prisons throughout America. And as a result, they produced an environment that had results or had effect on the population of the prison that was very detrimental. We don't have time to go into all the things that it talks about in here, but I did want to touch on the Holmesburg prison in particular because this is right in our backyard. This is here in Philadelphia, Chester, the Delaware Valley in general. Many of us know people that may have been in Holmesburg. Some of us out here may have been in Holmesburg prison. It says how the Philadelphia prison system scientifically created a homosexual culture and exported it into the Black community. He says there is no better illustration of this process than the homosexual project that was undertaken at Philadelphia's largest prison between 1951 and 1974. The University of Pennsylvania, in collaboration with the CIA and the U.S. Chemical Corps and various commercial companies such as Dow Chemical, used primarily Black inmates at the Holmesburg prison in Philadelphia as human guinea pigs and subjected them to a series of horrific scientific experiments. Inmates were deliberately injected with herpes, vaccinia, syphilis, gonorrhea, malaria, and dioxin, the toxic contaminant that the U.S. military of the U.S. military's infamous Agent Orange. Holmesburg became a huge Kmart of human research opportunities. Between 1962 and 1966, 33 pharmaceutical companies tested 153 experimental drugs at the prison. Look at that. And if you think they stopped in 1966, you're crazy. But you and I have to understand what they were doing in the 60s was the beginning of producing the environment that was the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and now in the 2000s that has decimated the Black community, destroyed the Black family, produced the drug and violent culture in our communities. See? He goes on to say the architect of the University of Pennsylvania research project was Dr. Albert Klingman, a dermatologist and a Jew, the son of Jewish immigrants from England and Ukraine. Dr. Klingman shared the Holmesburg prison experiment program with Dr. Milton Kahn and his brother, Dr. Bert Kahn, Jews. So to Edgar Shin, who helped develop the brainwashing and behavior modification techniques that targeted primarily Black inmates, he was a self-confessed Jew. Why do I emphasize the Jewish heritage of these key figures? It is because we are exposing another chapter in the history of the secret relationship between Blacks and Jews. A chapter in history we are calling the secret relationship between the white Jew and the Black homosexual. So, I mean, 153 experimental drugs in Holmesburg prison alone. Who knows all the other prisons and the other populations across America that they utilize? So, in 1964, in fact, Holmesburg prison became a secret military and CIA testing site. In that year, the U.S. Army Chemical Corps installed 3 trailers with padded cells inside the heavy walls of Holmesburg. The Army trailer had the UFP insignia on them. And between 1964 and 1968, the Army and the universities were turning 320 prisoners into human guinea pigs in secret warfare experiments. Some of our family members here in the Delaware Valley may have been a part of that. I can almost guarantee you, if enough of us ask questions, we know somebody who was either there or their family member was there and became a victim of these experiments at Holmesburg prison. See, look at this. Talking about the prison population. Look at how they think. You know, Ice Cube said, here's what they think about you. They were cheaper than buying chimpanzees, and the results were better, it was said. Also, prisoners was used because they were cheap and nobody gave a damn what happened to them. See, by that time, the 1960s, Pennsylvania became a hotbed and even the hub of unethical experimentation on inmates in the country. The Holmesburg was the epicenter of that research. So they controlled the environment. They used drugs, they used certain social conditioning, and they produced certain outcomes. But anyway, I didn't want to keep reading, but in there it talks about how one of the results of what happened is hypermasculinity. You know, you hear this term right now always being thrown around, toxic masculinity, right? Real masculinity is not toxic. What we look at is hypermasculinity, or what has been produced out of the enemy's demasculizing of the Black male and an attempt to regain masculinity in an unnatural way. So, environment can control behavior. So when I talked about all the cities, all the locations where we live, what are the environmental factors? And beyond the social factors, we know poor education, right? School starting this week again. Subpar education. We know high unemployment rate, right? Very little social outlets for children. We live in what they call concrete jungle. See, nature, grass, trees, the environment has an effect on you. How many of you ever been to the mountains? Been somewhere with a lot of grass, a lot of greenery? Doesn't it calm you? Doesn't it give you a certain feeling when you're in that kind of environment? Yes, they understand that. So we live in concrete jungles with very little green space. You know, I look on my block where I live. When I was younger, I grew up on the same block I live on now. Used to be trees all up and down the block. Now there's no trees on our block, except the few that people plant in the actual yard. But lining the streets used to be trees. Parks and playgrounds. These things are sparse in the cities. Philadelphia is a little unusual in that it has a lot of parks with the Fairmount Park system. But where the people live, you got to travel to Fairmount Park. Most people, some people live right around it, but it's important to be able to commune with nature. But that's not where we live. They have what they call housing developments, housing projects, people piled on top of one another. They understand what that does. So going over the things like the social economic conditions, I want to go even deeper as we get ready to wrap up, because the environment that gives birth to us and shapes us will determine the outcomes that we exhibit and experience for the most part. We know the outer environment of the cities of America. And when we come out of our homes, we walk into an environment that is absolutely charged with Black self-hatred, white supremacy, economic, educational, social disadvantages, and is really programmed and designed to cause the death and murder that we see. But before we actually get out of the house, our home environment plays a major, major role in the outcomes of our communities. And the enemy knows this. So he knows if he can break up the family structure as he did during slavery, he knows that if he can produce the economic conditions that makes it hard for a family to provide for itself, certainly a male to provide for his family, and you need two people working. If it's two people working full-time jobs in the home, then who's raising the children? I got to put them in daycare. I got to have them in school and after-school programs. I got them have to be what they call latchkey kids, where they come home and they by themselves. The internet, the television, media, raising our children. If I grow up in an environment where my mother and father aren't together, if I grow up in an environment when they are together and it's toxic, there's physical abuse and violence, there's drug abuse, there's alcoholism. All these things, what? They shape that new life. We can talk about the children, but you can tell a tree by the fruit it bears. Is that what the book says? We point the finger at our children, and they are absolutely out of control and have little to no respect for life. Some of them, not the majority, some of them. But the environment of our community, let's look at Chester, a small 5 square mile city that could be a paradise for us, is a hell for many. Because that environment has been produced, and that environment, if we don't change it from within, we can't look at outside forces to do it for us, because they're not going to do it. They have a vested interest in letting it get to where it is so they can come in and make it a heaven for themselves. Look at the gentrification in North Philadelphia. Parts of the city where people used to run from are now utopias for yuppies, coming back to the cities of America. And it'll be right there on the waterfront in Chester. The West Side, why do you think it's so dilapidated, so vacant on 3rd Street? Why do you think they built 291, built the soccer stadium? And you can see it, those lots and things that used to be $500, now they're a few thousand. Properties that used to be dirt cheap, the price is going up because there's a plan. So anyway, environment. What kind of home environment are we producing? And I'll close with these thoughts as we talked last week about being able um, to plan and implement a plan and change things. The environment we got to work on. If we're adults and we have children, if we have a home that we're the head of household, and we have others under our charge, namely our children, we have to do everything we can to make that environment what it should be. And for our own sanity and our own well-being, we have to make it what it should be. There's no worse feeling than coming home to an environment that you want to run away from. So the home has to become a refuge for adults as well as children. But many children, that be part of the look at this. Part of this whole pandemic and the trouble and part of the problem of the children not being in school is that where they gonna get food to eat? Think about this. We're relying on the schools to feed our children. So a lot of children, unfortunately, if they don't get there to the breakfast program and the lunch program, they're not gonna have nothing healthy to eat. And I'm not saying what they're getting there is healthy, but at least it's something to eat. So all during the pandemic, they were opening schools in Chester as well as in Philadelphia and all across America to do what? So children can come and still get a meal. What is it that has happened in our homes where our babies can't even get food there consistently? Some children are better off at school during the day than they are at home because A, maybe nobody's home, or B, what's going on at home is worse than what's going on in school. They talk about domestic abuse and violence has gone up. Suicide has gone up during the pandemic. I got to be honest. 30 years I've been in the Nation of Islam. And my wife and children would tell you, I've never spent this much time at home in all the time we've been married. And yeah, sometimes I get a little restless. And thank God, I work for my family. We have a family business. So even during the times when everything was shut down, I could come to the office even if it wasn't open. But most of the time we stayed open at least a little bit to do some work because it was in the middle of tax season. But anyway, what I wanted to say is I love going home to a family environment. Yeah, sometimes when you got everybody home, I got 4 children, 2, 3 grandchildren. So if everybody's there, and the children get to running around, sometimes you gotta say, okay, it's time to go home, everybody. But in general, home is refuge. You want to get home. And if you can't find peace at home, where you gonna find peace? And most of our environment that our children are growing up in our communities, there's not a lot of peace in the homes. Or if there is peace, at least there's not a lot of time spent there. Or you have a broken home, as they call it. You don't have both parents, or you have scarce resources. So all these things, what? Shape a mind, shape behavior. A lot of our children are angry. They don't even know why they're angry. They're hurt. Some of them abused. And the environment out of which they're coming, then they step out into another environment where drugs, and Father Flager on the program with Nick Cannon was saying he himself witnessed twice where people, white men, came into communities and dropped off duffel bags of guns in Chicago. Where the guns coming at that all these children have, all these people are shooting. They're not buying them legally. Where they coming from? And this is something. When the last time you had a big gun bust? When has the focus been on stopping the guns? stopping the drugs from coming to the community. All we want to do is lock up the drug dealer, the drug user, and fill up the prison population. So what? They can get slave labor and do more experimentation. So environment is great, great. Environment is stronger than nature, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said as we close out. So let's work on the environment that we are in and make it what we want it to be. You don't have to have a lot of money to make a peaceful environment. Now, you can't have no peace now if you can't feed your babies and yourself. So there has to be some kind of security there. Can't have no peace if the electric and the gas is off and it's hot or it's cold in the winter. The water's not on. You can't do certain things. So yes, there is a necessity that is bare minimum that we need in order to have a peaceful environment, a nurturing environment to bring life into the world and send life out into the world that won't be toxic, but will help be a healing to the community rather than add to the toxicity that's there, that's coming from the manufactured environment that is produced by our open enemy. So anyway, brothers and sisters, environment shapes behavior. So make sure you're very careful of the environment you put yourself in. Make sure you're very careful, even more careful of the environment you produce. And it starts with this environment between our ears. As we said earlier, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So what are we thinking? How are we thinking? You and I carry an atmosphere with us because thought is energy. You can put on the little electronoids and you can measure the brain waves and things of that nature. Thought is energy. And my daughter, my oldest daughter, she's all into energies now. She's about this energy, she'll tell you in a minute, you got some negative energy coming at you. But thinking is real. Your energy is produced by your thought. You can walk in a room and you can feel tension without nobody saying nothing because the thinking can be so heavy. The thought can be so heavy and negative, it charges the atmosphere. So you and I, and I'll close with this example. I know I keep closing. I sound like the minister, right? The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us for every physical reality, there's a spiritual counterpart. And we often use in the Nation of Islam that the earth, which is rotating on its axis at 1,037 1/3 miles per hour, under the direction of the light of the sun, it produces the earth in its rotation. It produces gravitation, but it also has an atmosphere around it. And there's an atmosphere, basically a fire around the earth that protects the earth from objects coming in and colliding with the earth. So when you have the space shuttle, and we watched it, many watched it live. When the space shuttle blew up in high school, I was in high school, I remember that. It was blowing up on takeoff, but there was another account when it was coming in and the heat shields were missing. So as it came in, it caught fire and began to disintegrate. Why? Because there's a ball of fire, there's an atmosphere of fire around the earth to protect it. And that atmosphere, part of it is produced by the motion and rotation of the earth. So you and I, how we think produces an atmosphere. How we carry ourselves produces an atmosphere. The knowledge, the wisdom, the understanding, the faith that we have produces an atmosphere. And I always tell my children, and I always talk about it, when given the opportunity, as an individual, you must be a thermometer, you must be a thermostat, not a thermometer. You want to be a thermostat, not a thermometer. Now, a thermostat contains a thermometer, but the two are very different and distinct because a thermometer reads the temperature on the outside of itself and it adjusts itself to that temperature and tells you what that temperature is. It's powerless against the effect of the outside environment. It only reads and responds and displays what's going on the outside of itself. But a thermostat has a thermometer that reads the temperature, but it also has a setting that's programmed, and based on that temperature setting, it reads the environmental temperature and then adjusts the temperature, or it responds to what it reads and then makes it what it wants to be. So if I set my thermostat at 70 degrees and the thermostat registers 80 degrees, it's going to kick the air on and make it what? 80 degrees or 70 degrees. And when it reaches 70 degrees, it cuts off. What is that saying? You can't let outside things determine the internal and determine the activity and determine the nature of who you are and what you are. Though it's very difficult, you can build up a great enough force from within so that your outer environment doesn't taint and change you before you change it. And this is why many people who live in the inner cities, they say, man, I got to get out of here. Many people need to get away because they may not have the willpower to resist what's going on in the environment, or we just want to get away because we don't want to fall victim to random violence, gunshots, and things of that nature. But what I'm saying is, if we work on increasing our knowledge, our wisdom, our understanding, controlling what goes in our minds, because that's the programming, controlling what we see, hear, think, these things will generate a certain pattern of thought that will produce an atmosphere. You know how it is when certain people come around. If you carry yourself a certain way, certain individuals, and we witness this in the Nation of Islam. As brothers in the Nation of Islam, we go out in the streets and we go into the worst environments in the worst cities all across America. And I've been in the notorious what they call them, the projects up there in Queens. Somebody, well, I don't know how many New Yorkers. Craig, if you listening, you help me out. I've been up there. I've been in Chicago high rises before they tore them down. I've been in Highland Gardens. I've been in Sun Village. I've been in the projects in Philadelphia. I worked at Abbotsford Projects in Philadelphia in the 90s. But my point is, when we come with a certain energy, a spirit and a mindset of self-respect, self-love, and love for those that we're encountering, you get a different response. And many will take what they're doing that may be, they feel offensive, whether it's smoking or drinking, and they'll, oh, I'm sorry, brothers, they'll apologize. Why? Because of the knowledge and the thinking that is present, especially when a group of us come together, that atmosphere that we carry helps to infect the environment. And that's why people say, man, where y'all at? Where the brothers at? Why can't y'all be here? Well, we can't be everywhere at all times. But if more of us think, not a religious thing, if more of us have a thought process that generates the right kind of atmosphere, and then collectively we are out and about amongst our people, and then we work on the environmental stimuli that works in our community, take charge of education, take charge of the economy, take charge of the politics, take charge. I love what they're doing to clean up. And yes, there's a shortage, there's a problem, but we can't sit around and cry. So you got Chester Sweeps doing a great work to help clean up our community, because that's where we live. We should demand of those who are paid and our tax dollars are paying for them to provide a service. But if they don't come, what we going to do? Sit there and look at it? No, we got to produce the atmosphere. The whole broken window type thing, that type of program, they talk about the effect of psychology. So anyway, environment shapes behavior, but a strong mind shapes an environment. Produce the right environment within your own being. Produce the right environment in your home. Produce the right environment on your block. And then spread it block to block. So brothers and sisters, thank you all who have tuned in for the time that we've been on. We just wanted to share, and we want to work because there's a wealth of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that God has given to us, whether you want to accept it or believe it or not. And it's not a religious thing. You know, I've talked about it before. The Islam of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Minister Farrakhan is scientific and mathematical. Yes, there's faith and there's religious aspects to it, but it ain't rooted in spookism and waiting on a mystery God to change our condition. And it ain't caught up in labels and politics and worried about what label you wear and what label I wear. It's about trying to do all we can to change the reality under which our people live. So brothers and sisters, thank you all again. Let's continue working to help change first ourselves. And by changing ourselves, we can change those who are closest to us, not by force, but by example. We can impact the environment in which we live, but it's going to take a change of thought first on our part. So let's change our world, our own little world we live in right here between our ears is our world. And if we can change that thinking, we can change our outer condition. So thank you all. May God bless you all. God willing, we'll talk again next week. Let's continue working to change the world one mind at a time. That's how we got to approach it. If we look at the whole thing, we might get intimidated. We might think it's impossible, but nothing's impossible. The book says to those who believe. We just have to strategize on how to do it. All right. Peace.
Peace.
So that change. Yeah. Big Snoop Dogg.
All right.
Live and direct. And I got something to say. You dig? Let's change the world.